If you were anything like me growing up, there would be two things your mum would do when she got the news that someone was coming to visit. First would be a mad dash around the house, cleaning everything, pretending that we don't actually live in a hovel. And second, she would bake a batch of scones. Hi, my name's Amy, and today I'm going to show you how to make the most perfect fruit scones. Now, in theory, scones are actually incredibly easy to bake. However, there is a few things that you can do which make the big difference between a okay scone and the best scones that you have ever tasted. So in this video, we're going to go through all of those steps while making my classic fruit scone recipe. So the first thing that you need to do is to pop your oven on. You want it to be at a high heat, about 220 degrees Celsius or 200 degrees Celsius for a fan oven. That's about gas mark 7. And then we're going to get a couple of baking sheets and we can either grease them with a little butter or pop some greaseproof paper onto them. And we're just going to set those aside until we're ready for them. In terms of ingredients, we're going to start with our flour. Now we are going to use a self-raising flour for our scones. However, if you don't have self-raising flour or it's not something that you can get your hands on easily, you can use a plain flour or an all-purpose flour and add the baking powder to make it into a self-raising flour. We're going to sift our flour into the bowl. We want to get as much air into our scones as possible. I always measure my ingredients. I do use the metric system because I'm here in the UK. I will share the link to the recipe. It will have cup conversions for those of you in the States. However, I do still recommend using a digital scale if you can, because when it comes to baking, a gram is a gram, a cup is open to interpretation. And with baking, it is a science and we want to get accuracy. So I would always recommend using a digital scale if you can. The great thing about digital scale as well is we can just pop our bowl straight onto there, set it to 0, and then add our ingredients. There's not a case of having to measure all the different ingredients beforehand. You can just do it as you go. So we're going 450 grams of self-raising flour. Just gonna go for it. And this is just when I pray that I actually have enough flour left. If not, I do have some plain flour we can make up the difference, but I think I'm going to be just about right. Yep, perfect. 450 self-raising flour, and we even have a little bit left there for when it comes to rolling our scones out. Now I know I said that it's a self-raising flour and that's going to help the raisin scones. However, we are also going to use some baking powder just to give them a little bit extra lift. We're going for a couple of teaspoons of baking powder. Now this is baking powder. It's also known as baking soda. It is not bicarbonate soda. That's slightly different. We want to make sure that it's the baking powder that we're using. 2 teaspoons of that, and we'll just put that in for flour. Like I say, that's going to give our scones a nice lift. The scones themselves are quite a dense mixture, so by adding our raisin agents, it just helps give that little bit of a lift there as well. Like I say, we want to make sure that we're sifting that into the bowl, again, getting as much air into that dough as possible. Okay, next we're going to add some sugar. I am using caster sugar. You can of course swap that out for something like a golden caster sugar if you prefer a scone that isn't quite as sweet. We don't add a whole load of sugar into this purely because we've also got our dried fruit into there. We are using sultanas for these fruit scones and they add a bit of sweetness as well. But I would always recommend adding at least a little bit of sugar just to give them a little bit of extra flavour. Like I say, it is caster sugar that we are using today. You can use a golden caster sugar should you prefer. And we're going for 50 grams of this, and we'll just set our scale back to 0 there. Perfect. So next up we're going to add our butter. Now you can use a block margarine or a butter, personal preference which you prefer. I'm actually going to use a block margarine because it's dairy free and it means my husband can enjoy these as well. If you are using a block margarine, just make sure that it is a good quality one with a high fat content, and don't use the spreadable margarine. That is too soft and it's not going to bring your scones together as good as a block one. Now, perhaps the most important thing when it comes to whether it's butter or margarine that you use, you want to make sure that it is cold, very cold. You can even pop it in the freezer if your fridge is not getting it cold enough. You want it to be really cold and pretty much solid. Now, the reason for that is that we want to have our hot oven and we want to have cold ingredients. The butter in particular is important that it is cold, because what we're going to do is we're going to break this up into our flour and sugar here, and then we're going to bring it together with our fingers to create a sandy consistency. So we don't want the butter to be blended right through everything. We want to keep just tiny little nuggets of butter throughout the mixture. And what's going to happen is then when that bakes, those little bits of butter are going to melt and they're going to create air pockets in your scone, giving it again a lighter texture. And we're not going loads of butter here because we are going to be breaking it down and we want it to be dispersed quite nicely throughout the dough. And so we're going 50 grams of butter here, and what we want to do is just break that into little pieces into there If you were somewhat more organised than I am, you can go ahead and do this ahead of time. I just like to do things as I go. And just by breaking it up like this, you're just going to make it easier when it comes to mixing as opposed to one big lump of butter in there. Perfect, so 50 grams of butter there. I'm actually going to take my rings off for this because we are going to get our hands dirty. So another important tip when it comes to making scones is that you want to use a light touch. So we want to be using our hands. You can use stand mixers, but I tend to find that you will end up with a slightly denser scone because you don't have as much control as to when things are just ready. At this stage, we want to be getting the butter mixed in and get those little nuggets of butter throughout. As we go on though, it is even more important that we are not over mixing the dough. Like I say, hands straight in. We're going to take our little bits of butter and we're just going to break them up in our fingers to make even smaller bits of butter. And we're just using our fingertips here. We want to be rubbing that into the butter and sugar mixture there. And like I say, it's a sandy consistency is what we're after. Just using our fingertips, we just want to rub all that in together. And what you can do as well, like I say, we want to get as much air into our scones as possible. Lift your fingers a little while you do this. Again, just getting as much air as possible into that flour, which gives us a nice lighter dough. There's nothing worse than biting into a scone and finding it's a bit like a rock. When it comes to making scones, this is probably the most time-consuming part, I suppose. But you really want to make sure you get this part right. You don't want to end up with huge big lumps of butter throughout, because then you will have scones with big holes in it. And we always want to have those nice little ear pockets as opposed to big cavities in the middle of a scone. And just make sure you go through the flour there, just checking for any large clumps of butter that have maybe missed. Getting all of that evenly distributed throughout. So that's starting to look good. I don't know if you can really see, but there is still some wee bits of butter just in there. Brilliant, so that's looking good. Like I say, almost a kind of breadcrumby consistency with those little bits of butter throughout. Now, before we move on to the liquids, I have just realised I forgot to put some salt in there. So we're just going to add a little bit of salt to the dough. Salt's one of those things in baking that you sometimes wonder, is it really necessary? And I would say most of the time it is. Not only for flavour, especially when you're baking and there's a lot of sweetness, the salt can help with making it not be too sweet, but also there's a sort of science element to it as well, where the salt does help with the reaction between ingredients. So I'm using sea salt, which is always my preference. It's just not quite as salty as a table salt. And we just want a wee sort of pinch in there. A generous pinch for that one, I would say. I'll just give that a quick mix through there. Ideally, you would add that with your flour. Now, before we move on to the liquids, we're going to add our sultanas. I use sultanas because I like them. You can use raisins, you can use currants. You could even go crazy with some cranberries, whatever your personal preference is. A dried fruit for a fruit scone is obviously required. The sultanas I'm using are just your bog standard budget sultanas from the supermarket. Golden sultanas are a nice little luxury though, and I do enjoy using them from time to time as well. Again, we'll just get our scales back. Now, when it comes to the amount of fruit you're going to add, I recommend about 100 grams. Again, it depends on what you're using. If you're using currants, you might go a little bit less because they are quite small and disperse quite well. If you love dried fruit, you could add more if you want a really fruity scone. Or, on the other hand, if you're someone that just wants a little bit in there, doesn't want it to be overwhelming, add less. Same goes if you've maybe only got, a little bit of a bag left and you just want to use them up, just chuck them in. It's really, there's not a science when it comes to the fruit part of things, more the dough. So just use what your heart tells you. Like I say, I'm going for about 100 grams here. I find that to be just about the right amount for myself. And we just want to mix that through. The reason we're doing this before we add the liquid is once we add the liquid, we're going to be very gentle with our dough. We don't want to have to over mix it at that point. So if the sultanas or dried fruit of choice is already mixed through, it means that that part's done. We don't have to worry about adding them and mixing more than we would like. Just give that a good wee toss through there. And then what I'm going to do here is create a little well, which is basically a little hole into the middle of the ingredients, and that's where the liquids are going to go. Just makes it easier to then mix everything through. So when it comes to the liquids, you have a few options here. You can just go straight in with some milk. That is somewhat traditional and what my mum would quite often use as well, because scones were usually done on the fly and you would always have some milk, but you might not necessarily have some yogurt or some buttermilk as well. Now in my recipes, I recommend using yogurt. Buttermilk is another popular traditional addition to scones, and they do make a very rich scone. The reason I use yogurt is because you can get different kinds, including dairy-free, if that is something that you want to be careful of, and it's also just slightly more accessible than buttermilk. You do find buttermilk in most bigger supermarkets these days, but you will find yogurt in every supermarket, big or small. I would recommend an unflavoured yogurt as opposed to something with flavour. You can add a flavoured yogurt, but generally speaking, they're not really flavoured enough to come through in the scone. So for example, if you use a strawberry one, it's not necessarily going to taste like strawberry strawberries, but it might have a taste, which it can be hard to identify and might distract from the overall taste and texture of your scone. I'm going to be using some milk and some yogurt. We're just going to measure them out. Now, I would always recommend when you're using your jug is to measure out your milk first, and I'm going to show you why. Again, we want these to be straight from the fridge, we want them to be cold, because we don't want that butter to melt before it hits the oven. So if you're sticking with the cold ingredients, just, keep that chilled. So for our milk, we're going to about 200 millilitres. So I'm just going to measure that out on my jug here. Okay, and then for my yogurt, I am using a Greek style yogurt. You can just use a plain yogurt, which is a bit more runny, whereas a Greek yogurt tends to be a slightly thicker one. However, once you've measured out your milk, all we want to make sure we're doing is adding that yogurt up to the point of 300 mils. So we're adding 100 mils of yogurt. So then once it gets up to 300, we know we've got enough there. You do it the other way around, you're giving yourself a little bit extra work because you're trying to measure out yogurt that is sticking to itself and not wanting to stick in the jug as nice as the milk will. Another great alternative is some sour cream, especially in something like a cheese scone. Sour cream can be a nice change as well. The reason these ingredients, buttermilk, yogurt, sour cream work is due to the acidity in them. And what's going to happen is once they hit the raising agents in the flour, they're going to react. Now, if you're just using milk, you do get a bit of that reaction, but this just gives it that little extra oomph. So by using the yogurt, sour cream, buttermilk, whatever your preference, you are going to give that science reaction into your scone, which, like I said, we want nice, light, fluffy scones. We don't want them to be too dense. We don't want them to be rocks. So this just gives it a little bit extra oomph into the dough. So I've added our yogurt into the milk there. We're just going to give this a wee whisk around just to kind of break up that yogurt a bit. It doesn't need to be perfectly mixed through because once we start getting our hands into the dough, that'll help bring it all together. So like I say, we have our flour mixture here with the sultanas and the butter in it. We're going to add our milk and our yogurt into that. And this is where we're going to get really dirty hands. So sleeves up, just have to go for it. Into the middle there. So that's where our well is quite handy because it just keeps all the ingredients there into the middle and we're not then fighting against the bowl trying to get it all in. Like I say, we're going to go hands in. You will end up with dirty hands, just the way it is. If you got kids, it's a great one to get them to do it. And just bring it all together there. Now, this is where I was saying that it's really important that we use soft touch with scones. We don't want to overmix. We just want to bring everything together until we have a really soft, sticky kind of dough. You'll see that it instantly starts to come together just as all that flour gets absorbed into the liquid. And again, we're just using our fingers. We're not going in too hard. I've heard a good description of using like a claw just to bring it all together. Get your hand in there. And really, we're just kind of pulling it all together until it starts to stick. It will stick to your fingers as well, so just make sure you're pulling that off. Otherwise, you're going to end up really sticky fingers and a somewhat dry dough otherwise. You can see we're starting to stick together a bit there. That's what we want. Just give a couple of another wee turns. And then we're going to get it out on our work surface. Now, we do knead it slightly, but nowhere near like what you would with a bread dough. So we've got kind of soft, sticky, almost kind of crumbly dough as we kind of bring it together here. This is looking good. We're actually going to pop this out onto our work surface now. Try and get as much off my fingers as possible. I'm actually just going to wash this off my hands, otherwise the dough is going to keep sticking to me. So we're going to get a wee bit more flour here. We're just going to pop this on the work surface. Don't need loads, just enough to stop it from sticking down there. Going to tip our dough out. See, it's a wee bit crumbly at some bits, sticky in the middle. Exactly how we'd want it. Going to bring our hands and bring that into a dough kind of all stuck together there. So like I say, we don't want to overly knead it. We just want to make sure that it's all together. So a couple of wee kneads there. So that's our dough there. Somewhat sticky in the middle, a little bit crumbly, quite rough around the edges. A bit like myself. Now, when it comes to a scone dough, this is one of the most important things I will tell you. And please do listen. Put down the rolling pin. Do not roll your scone dough. We've gone to these extremes to have a nice soft touch with it. The last thing we want to do is be whacking it with a rolling pin and knocking all of that air out of it. Instead, you've got two hands, let's use them. So just make sure you've got enough flour down there. You don't need loads, but just enough that's not going to stick. And we're going to use our fingers and just push down, even palm your hand, push down on that dough, flatten it out. Now, one of my favourite tips when it comes to scone making, and this is one that always blows people's minds. You know when you go to a cafe and you get that perfect scone and it just pulls apart and it's just got the perfect height, pulls apart, and you've got your two perfect halves. The way to achieve that is very simple. Like I say, once you know this tip, you will use it every single time you make scones. To create that perfect middle on a scone, all we're going to do is fold our dough. Once we fold it, it creates that separation of two layers. They will stick together in the bake. I'll show you one to come out the oven. It makes a huge difference. You just get a perfect height and that perfect split down the middle. Flatten our dough out. It doesn't have to be hugely flattened at the moment, just enough that we can get the two halves and fold it over. As easy as that. Now we're just going to flatten this out again a little bit more. That fold in the middle is still there even when we flatten it out. Now, you don't want to go too flat with scones. There is this kind of misconception that they will rise loads in the oven. They won't. They will rise a little, but they don't rise like a cake does. It is a heavier dough. It has a lot of weight on it, so you want to keep it fairly thick. Now, depending on your overall size of scones, you obviously want to match the thickness. If you're doing big scones, you obviously need them to be a little bit taller, otherwise you're doing pancakes. If you're doing little scones, you know, they don't have to be quite as high. So here's your best judgment. I would say at least about 2 or 3 centimeters in height, depending on how big you're going, about 5 centimeters possibly. But don't go flat. There's nothing worse than a flat scone that you then cut in half and you've got 2 little thin bits that are quite pathetic, really. So yeah, so don't go too thin with them. Okay, so once you've got them to about the thickness you would like, we're going to take our cutter. Now I'm just using a sort of standard fluted round cutter. Again, you can use whatever you want. If you don't have any round cutters and you like round scones, just use a glass, a cup, something like that. Just something that's going to give you your shapes. If you want to go a bit more rustic, just cut them into whatever shape you like. I know triangles are quite a popular shape for scones over in America. Even just some rough squares would be absolutely fine. They're all going to taste as good regardless of the shape. Now you want to take your cutter, we're going to add a little bit extra flour here just into the cutter so we're not having our scones stick. Another very important tip coming up. When it comes to cutting your scones, you just want to go straight down. You do not want to twist the cutter. If you twist the cutter, what you're going to end up doing is the walls of your scone, the sides of them, are going to twist, and then when it comes to bake, they can't rise up the way they want to. They end up twisted out the way and they just can't move. Let's not do that to our scones. So take your cutter and you just want to push down quite confidently. Pull that out, move it from the cutter, and there we have it. A lovely scone. Now we're going to pop that on our tray and repeat. Again, do not twist that cutter. Now, the size of your cutter will of course determine how many scones you get. Should say I'm not twisting there, I'm just trying to cut some of the sultanas. Fit one more? Yes, I will fit one more. So we've got, I'd say, yeah, 6 average size scones there. Now we've obviously got some dough left here. We are going to continue to use that, so we can just gently bring it together. Just kind of press it back into a doughy circle there. Again, just be very gentle. I'm going to flatten that out again, and we're even going to fold it again. I'm just trying to shape this so I can get the most scones to it. Again, aiming for a similar kind of height here. So I think I'll get another 2 here. And then we can use our last for that last scone of the batch. It's always a little bit misshapen. There we go. Don't just waste that. Shape it sort of roughly. Make sure we use every last bit of the dough. There we are. A little bit more rough than the other ones. Still tastes just as good. We've got a couple of trays of lovely looking scones here. Now, the next step is to let them rest. Because we have been working that dough slightly, we will have kind of woken up all the gluten in that dough, and we just want to let it relax back down again before we bake them. If you're in a rush, it's not the end of the world, but really for the best scones, you do want to give them that opportunity to rest. Just, 5 minutes. I usually do the washing up and then I come back and get them ready to go in the oven. It just gives them a little chance to breathe before we bake. Okay, so it's been 5-10 minutes and we're just going to get the scones ready to go in the oven now. One last step that I always recommend before putting them in the oven is to just give them a little wash. You can use egg if you want, that gives that nice sheen that you sometimes see on top of a scone. Alternatively, a little bit of milk is absolutely fine. You won't get the same shine, but it just gives it a nice finish at the same time. I'm going to use a little bit of milk, just a little pastry brush. Now again, another top tip, when you are doing this, especially if you're using egg, be very careful just to keep it on top of the scone. You don't want to end up with that wash running down the edges. Again, when it tries to rise, it will end up pulling on it, so it can't get the same lift as it would like to. So just on top of your scones, a little wash. Quite often you'll have ended up with a slight floury top on them, and this just helps combat that as well. And that's our scones ready for the oven. So we're going to pop them in the oven, which will be nice and hot now. For these size of scones, about 8 to 10 minutes of baking. Obviously, the smaller the scone, the less time. The bigger the scone, you might need a little bit more, but just keep a close eye on them while they're baking. Like I say, it is going to a very hot oven, so they will start to bake very quickly. And as long as we've done everything right, they should come out nice and light and fluffy. Watch out. So that's our scones now out the oven. It's about 10 minutes. You'll have seen that I took them out halfway through and turned my trays. That's purely because my oven seems to have a bit of a hot spot on one side. So it does bake a bit faster in one corner. Your oven might be the same. Yours could be completely different. If there's one thing I have learned from renting houses over the years is that every oven is different. And yeah, despite this one being somewhat new, still has a hot spot on one side. I wish you could smell this because they just smell absolutely amazing. You'll see that they have risen a little bit, and here is a good example of that split in the middle that I was talking about. You can see that that's just going to pull apart perfectly for a nice spreading of jam and butter. And yeah, you'll see that they have risen a little bit as well. The ones on the top shelf are slightly more brown on top than the bottom, but both are baked very nicely. A great way to tell if your scones are ready is to pick one up and check on the bottom. If it has a nice bit of colour onto the bottom there, and also it'll have a slightly hollow sound. So I think it's about time we opened one of these up and had a taste. Perfect split in the middle. And as you can see, they are nice and light and soft inside. Just exactly what we would want. Now, what you put on your scone is completely up to you. I'm Scottish, so a bit of butter, a bit of jam, and it's a good one. If you are down south, of course, you know, your cream and jam, and whether you do jam or cream and jam, I'm not getting involved in that dispute. Like I say, butter and jam is my personal preference. And I do think that scones are best enjoyed while they're still warm from the oven. If it's been a day or two and you want to bring your scones back to life, you can pop them back into the oven just to warm them up again. Alternatively, we blast in the microwave is nice as well. My favourite is actually a seeded jam, a seeded raspberry jam, but I've only got seedless at the moment, so we will make do. Nice bit of jam on there, bit of butter. But yes, cheers. The perfect scone. Nice crisp outer edge, nice and soft in the middle. A little bit of sweetness. Got those lovely juicy sultanas, the jam and the butter. Just absolutely perfect. I'll put the full recipe into the description below, but you will also find it on bakingwithgranny.co.uk along with all the tips and tricks that I've mentioned, as well as a little reminder for you. If you did enjoy this recipe, and if you do give it a little try, let me know. Like, subscribe, all that usual sort of stuff. And if you do make them, take a little picture and send it to me on Instagram, Facebook, all the usual places where you'll find me at Baking with Granny. Until next time, happy baking!